Excellencies, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to this very important session on climate adaptation for resilience at the 2021 Davos Agenda. My name is Dominic Warre. I'm a Managing Director here at the World Economic Forum, and I'm really looking forward to moderating our discussion today. Let me start by saying that this is a truly unique session as we're co-hosting it with the Government of the Netherlands as the official closing session of the 2021 Climate Adaptation Summit, which was a 24-hour live-streamed event focused on scaling up global cooperation and leadership for a climate-resilient future. So congratulations to all of you over in the Netherlands. The summit was a fantastic success. I'm sure you saw some of it in the press, and it's demonstrated great momentum from several heads of state, ministers, business and civil society leaders on what we need to do to radically step up our adaptation actions. We look forward to hearing more from the moderator, Sacha de Boer, later on in this discussion. But let me say a few words of introduction to start with. As many of you know, listening in, 2021 is a critical year for climate action. The COVID pandemic has created a new reality, presenting us with both opportunities and risks. The opportunity for a great reset and creating more resilient, equitable and climate-smart societies, but also the risk of locking in climate tipping points threatening our planetary stability. The 2021 Global Risk Report from the World Economic Forum identifies climate action failure and extreme weather events as the most likely long-term risks we face over the next decade. And just a few weeks ago, the World Meteorological Organization announced that 2020 is on track to be the joint hottest year on record with 2016, and jointly, if not firstly, the most hottest decade, 2010 through 2020. So it's obvious we're not keeping pace with the scale and impact of the climate crisis. We need to raise ambition, and more importantly, we need to translate that ambition into action. That's why here at the World Economic Forum, our Executive Chairman and Founder, Professor Klaus Schwab, announced 1 year ago at our annual meeting in Davos 2020 a net zero challenge, asking forum members to radically step up their targets to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. And we're now working with several alliances to help us achieve our vision. The CEO Climate Leaders Alliance, which represents over 85 companies, and the International Business Council with 122 companies globally who will be implementing some ESG metrics. In addition, through initiatives like our Mission Possible partnership, we're working directly with heavy industries to help key sectors decarbonize in what are so-called hard-to-abate areas like aviation and shipping. Since its launch at the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019, this initiative, the Mission Possible partnership, has grown from 30 to over 400 companies, and with a great partnership with others, we're all working with the UN-led processes to deliver sector-specific decarbonisation outcomes to unlock finance, technologies and policy solutions that will accelerate the transition and promote the race to zero. So through these initiatives, we are working closely with the COP presidency, both 25 and the presidency designate, COP 26, and the COP high-level champions in the lead-up to the important meeting in Glasgow at the end of the year. So I'm delighted that we have the COP26 President, Alok Sharma, with us today, and we look forward to discussing how we can deliver high climate ambition outcomes at Glasgow. So we can do this, but we can't do it alone. And that's why we're going to move to hear from the panel about how the Climate Adaptation Summit went, and then we'll hear from the host of that summit later on in the discussion. So, with no further ado, we'll turn to our panel discussion. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists to this discussion. We have a great panel for you, and I also want to flag to the audience that after the panel presentations, we will have an interactive question-answer session if we have time. So on your Slido, you can submit questions directly. It's very easy. You can simply scan the QR code to submit your questions. So let's get on and meet the panel. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists. We have in no particular order of esteemed capabilities and fame, the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, Professor Petteri Talas. Welcome, sir. Feiko Sijbesma, the Honorary Chairman of Royal DSM, which is a leading Dutch company and a global commissioner on adaptation, and, may I say, an Honorary Chair and founder of the CEO Climate Leaders Alliance I mentioned earlier. Welcome, sir. Rebecca Marmot, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Unilever, an incredible leader at an incredible company at the forefront of corporate action on climate and social issues. Welcome, Rebecca. And I'm also delighted, as I mentioned, to welcome to the discussion the Right Honourable Alok Sharma, COP26 President from the United Kingdom, the person in charge of the 2021 climate meeting in Glasgow. Welcome, sir. It's delightful to have you, given how much you have on your agenda. I'm also delighted to say that a little bit later in the conversation we'll be joined by Mr. Shinjiro Koizumi, who's the Minister of Environment of Japan. Japan, as you know, recently announced a national net zero target commitment. So let's get going with the discussion. You see the QR code on your screen if you want to ask any questions as we discuss. Professor Talas, if I could start with you. The statistics that you and your organisation have put out about 2020 are quite incredible. Joint hottest year ever, the end of the joint hottest decade ever, fires in the Arctic, let alone California and Australia, floods in Asia, heat waves in the ocean, 29 tropical storms across the Atlantic, so many that we ran out of alphabet letters. You must be quite concerned, to say the least, as the leading scientific organisation in this space. And I guess the question is, how do we better prepare and adapt for the events that we are seeing if more is to come? And specifically, what are you looking for this year in the run-up to the COP summit for actors both from the public and private sector to do? Over to you, sir.
Thanks for the invitation to address you, and I would like to thank also the government of Netherlands for hosting excellent Global Adaptation Summit yesterday, which I also had a chance to participate in. As you said, climate change is only very visible. We have reached 1.2 degree warming so far, and there's 24% probability that we would reach 1.5, the low limit of Paris Agreement during the coming 5 years. We have stored lots of extra heat to the oceans, and we are breaking records there year by year. And also the same is true for the main greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. Year by year, we are breaking new records. And we have started seeing growing amount of disasters, growing amount of economic losses, and big impact on human welfare worldwide. Mitigation is, of course, very essential. We have heard encouraging news from European Union, China, USA, Japan, South Korea, and South Africa. But it's time to go from political promises to concrete action. So what finally matters is what happens in the real atmosphere. And so far, we haven't anything positive to report about that. The negative trend in climate will continue until 2060s and sea level rise until next century. And that happens despite of the success of implementation of Paris Agreement. This means that we have to pay much more attention to climate adaptation. And one of the very powerful ways to adapt to climate change is to invest in early warning services. Today, only 40% of our 193 members have proper early warning services, and also the basis of early warning services, the global observing system is in fairly poor shape. We have poor observing systems of weather, climate, and water, especially in Africa, Caribbean, Pacific islands, and also some parts of Latin America. That means that the accuracy of the forecasts in those regions especially is poor, and it's having a negative impact on the quality of forecasts worldwide, also in developed world. That's why we have created 3 major initiatives to improve the situation. We have already cruise initiative ongoing, which was initiated by the government of France, and we have now 8 contributing countries, and Finland just announced yesterday that they are joining this initiative. This is supporting the further development of multi-hazard early warning services with impacts. So that's important. And then we have to improve our observing systems, and that's why we have created systematic observation financing facility, SOF, and we need $400 million to improve the situation, especially in Africa, 6 countries and some Latin American countries. And thirdly, we are also working to build a water climate accelerator to improve the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 6. We don't have proper ways to control the water resources to cope with the drought and flooding. And we have 10 UN agencies behind this initiative and several governments at the heads of state and minister level. And this is a subset of United Nations water. So to conclude, we have to pay attention to adaptation and mitigation. And from WMO's side, we are happy to be part of the game. Thank you.
Secretary General, thank you so much. And it's very heartening to hear about the amount of effort and collaboration internationally that's occurring in early warning systems to get us ready for this future. If I can turn to you, Faka Sibesma, you're a commissioner on the Global Adaptation Commission, and you were involved in the summit yesterday along with colleagues on this session. What were the key messages coming out of the Commission, and moving forward, what needs to happen next?
Thank you, Dominic, and great for organizing this. 2 years ago, we started with the Global Commission on Climate Adaptation. It was mentioned in the Paris Treaty, but not so strong. It was mainly in the Paris Treaty where we got our climate approach on mitigation. As we all know, unfortunately, we are not on track on achieving our Paris goals, so we need to work harder on mitigation. And in the meantime, the impact on climate change is growing, especially for the developing countries, where we realize its effect of every single day. And therefore, we started with this Global Commission on Adaptation, and we set up also the Global Center for Climate Adaptation, co-chaired by Mr. Ban Ki-moon and myself. What we do there is developing best practices for resilient food production in terms of drought, and how can we produce our food when it's too dry or too wet, or how can we protect infrastructure in the West, but also in the South, so to say, or cities or water, etc. And those best practices which we develop can be rolled out. We do that also with the African Development Bank in the different countries. It's not only for the public sector, also for the private sector who need to join, to be honest, also in their own interest to protect their own supply chains. But also, since we figured out that climate adaptation and investing in that can take care of another 0.7% extra economic growth in terms of GDP globally and provide millions of jobs. So what we said yesterday is we need adaptation next to mitigation. And we need to work on that from the public and the private sector on both, hand in hand, because climate change is a reality today. Today, globally, Dominic, we spent about 30 billion. If I take all companies and all governments, etc., globally all together, went down a little bit over the last year, and it needs to increase with a factor 10 over the coming years in order to fulfill our ambitions. So that needs to be done. And several governmental leaders, including my own Dutch Prime Minister, mentioned maybe we should split the total finance of mitigation and adaptation in a 50-50 manner. And I think that is good. I hope that during this year, towards the COP, we can raise the money, allocate the money, both on mitigation and adaptation. And like I said, work out concrete best practices, because climate change is a reality today. And therefore, the solutions need to be implemented for people today and obviously for generations to come. And I think this journey could continue mitigation and adaptation in parallel, hand in hand in mitigation. And Alok Sharma knows very well the race to net zero, reducing strongly our emissions, and in adaptation to make ourselves resilient, so the race to full resilience. And I think there is also a moral, a humanitarian obligation also from the richer countries to support in this respect the poorer countries for whom climate change impact is a reality every single day. And that was, I think, the main breakthrough of yesterday, that so many governmental leaders said, we are behind that, we will do that, we will invest in that, we will develop the best practices for this and the next generation. Race to net zero, race to resilience.
Thank you, Feike. That's a very good way of putting these hand in hand, isn't it? The race to net zero, which has really caught on over the past 12 months, and the race to full resilience together, and with that 50-50 proposal of the financing. I'd very much like to welcome, and you can probably see him on your screens, His Excellency Junjiro Koizumi, who's the Environment Minister of Japan. Welcome, sir. We'll come to you in a second, but just this link that Feike, you mentioned about the private sector as well, maybe we can turn to Rebecca Marmot, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer, as I mentioned, for Unilever. Rebecca, Unilever is a leader in the net zero. You committed for net zero emissions in all Unilever products by 2039 latest, which is an incredible and exciting goal. And here we're talking about climate adaptation at the same time. Is this a thing that large companies like yours have to think about and tackle? And are there examples of the sorts of ways you go about these sorts of issues? Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Dominic. Morning, everybody. It is, Dominic, as you say, it is something that we are spending huge amounts of time trying to tackle. Climate change is obviously impacting a business like ours right the way across the value chain in numerous different ways, from how and where we're growing and sourcing raw materials, the direct manufacturing, the people and the communities that we're serving around the world, how they use our products. So we've had to try and tackle that in a multitude of different ways. You talked very briefly about some climate commitments that we made last year. There's two medium-term emissions reduction goals underneath that 2039 goal that you mentioned. One around reaching zero emissions across our operations by 2030, and the one that you talked about by 2030, right the way across the GHG footprint of all of those products. But of course, we can't tackle that just in isolation. We've also, at the same time, made targets around deforestation-free supply chains, really thinking about how do we work with a new generation of farmers and smallholders through what we're calling our regenerative agriculture code. I'll come back to that in a second. And then specifically on water stewardship programs for communities that we're working with around the world. And of course, Dominic, with the work that you're doing on the WRG, on the Water Resources Group. But I think if I just particularly talk about that area of adaptation to climate change that is about better water management. So across the world, we all know, many of the people on this call, over 70% of the fresh water is used around the world for agriculture, and a lack of water is reducing yields, it's reducing crop quality, it can destroy a whole harvest, which has a terrible impact, especially for the smallholder farmers. So water scarcity for us is a massive challenge for farmers in a lot of the countries where we're sourcing our crops. And we see that becoming even more volatile, where we're seeing rising temperatures, more frequent droughts, unpredictability around rainfall patterns. So when I look at how can we help farmers in the supply chain to adapt to that, how can we use water more efficiently to improve crop yields? So we're focusing specifically at the moment on water scarce countries and thinking about very water intensive crops, for example, like tomatoes. So a couple of examples: in South Africa, our Knorr brand are working very closely now with smallholder farmers on a number of different approaches to better cultivate herbs using less water. We're doing that in partnership with WWF in the Drakensberg area. And I think through good governance, improved land management, we can then help to replicate that program around the world. I think on regenerative agriculture specifically, we're about to publish some new guidelines for our suppliers on how to deliver better outcomes around nourishing soil, thinking about increasing biodiversity, improving water quality and climate resilience. One other brief area I just wanted to mention is how do we use innovation so that we can help to change our products and so that they're better able to be used by communities around the world who are impacted by this. So we need to think about how, through research and development, can we make products that provide the same kind of performance but they use less water or even, unfortunately, poor quality water, or perhaps even no water quality at all. So we've done a lot of work into looking at things like showering habits. How can we work with scientists to help consumers save energy and water? We know in our value chain, around 95% of GHG emissions associated with our shampoos, soaps and shower gels, things like that, come from people using hot water, especially for showers. So that kind of research that we're doing helps us understand what the catalysts are for changing people's behaviours. So I'll give you, a couple of examples. In laundry, for example, we found that people often use a lot more washing detergent than they actually need. So by creating very positive, concentrated detergents, things like we make it easier for people to use the correct amount. And in areas where consumers are willing to collect, we've developed products now that kill the amount of foam that comes out in the wash. So, for example, you might only need to use 1 bucket of water instead of 3. So I think that risk-based approach encourages policymakers to consider a whole range of different future conditions. Adaptation shouldn't be undertaken in an isolated way. Really need to think about it in a very joined up and integrated way. So just to end, I'd echo Feike's words. Thank you to Alok Sharma for his leadership. And as we go forward to the autumn, we're really looking forward to working with Alok Sharma, with others in the public and the private sector and governments, so that we can have a successful COP26.
Rebecca, thank you very much. It's fascinating to hear some of those very specific examples where organisations, companies such as yourself are really getting into the weeds, so to speak, of how to build up from the specific to the more general. Alok, we'll come to you in a second, but with Koizumi-san, perhaps we can bring him in first, because, Minister, Japan really is a leader when it comes to climate adaptation, preparedness and disaster risk reduction. You were the catalyst for the Sendai framework of disaster risk reduction in Japan in 2015, which was endorsed by all of the United Nations parties, a bit like a Paris Agreement for risk reduction and disaster preparedness. So perhaps you are able to share some perspectives from your side on how Japan is tackling the rising impact of climate change, and from listening to the analysts, what you need to see in terms of the adaptation agenda for 2021. And then we'll move on to you, Alok Sharma, as the COP president. Minister Koizumi, over to you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Let me express my respect to the host of this closing session, the government of the Netherlands and the World Economic Forum. Last year became yet another sobering reminder that adaptation is urgent. Extreme heat, wildfires, torrential rain, these disasters and the damage they bring know no borders. Redesigning of our socio-economic system, therefore, is definitely needed. Now, let me answer the two questions one by one. Japan is one of the few countries with dedicated law on adaptation, as we recognize. Adaptation requires the whole of government approach. That means embedding the adaptation perspective in every relevant policy. Even the Ministry of Defense takes part in the Governmental Council on Adaptation, because adaptation is also a matter of national security. Mr. Warren, you mentioned disaster risk reduction. Here, our strategy is to enhance the synergy between climate action and disaster risk reduction. I call it adaptive recovery. It is about resilience measures that take into account adaptation needs. It includes the control of land use for communities to better adapt to climate change. Let's not forget, developing countries need support in their adaptation efforts. Japan is working on this front too. At G20 Environment Ministers meeting in 2019, Japan established a science-based knowledge platform on adaptation called AP+ that helps enhance the country's coping capacity. Going back to the other question on the private sector, adaptation can be a risk or an opportunity for businesses. With this in mind, the government collects and shares best practices of adaptation to support the private sector. both in avoiding supply chain risks and in creating new business opportunities. Talking about businesses, by the way, Japan counts the highest number in terms of the TCFD membership and ranked second in the world and first in Asia in its commitment to science-based targets. Last but not least, let me draw your attention to the progress in our mitigation efforts. Japan's new Prime Minister Suga announced in his policy speech that Japan will become carbon neutral by 2050. We will write the carbon neutrality goal into law to ensure legal grounds, credibility, and policy continuity. He also pledged to make all new car sales to be electric by 2035 through doubling EV incentives on certain conditions. Tokyo's EV target is even more ambitious. It's 2030. Furthermore, our discussions on carbon pricing have started in earnest. Besides that, we will submit a bill on plastic resource circulation to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. Japan plans to have a roundtable on circular economy, CE Davos, together with the World Economic Forum in March. This will be an excellent venue for showcasing various efforts toward the circular economy. Minister Sharma, let's join forces for a successful COP26, and together, let's redesign our socio-economic system beyond COVID-19. Thank you very much. Arigato.
Arigato, Minister Koizumi. Thank you so much for that. So, Alok Sharma, COP26 President, we've heard from the science, we've heard from the Commission on Adaptation with some pretty good ideas on policy and directions from the leaders in the private sector and from a leading party, as they say in the United Nations, a leading government who's working on these issues. Perhaps some food for thought there in terms of the adaptation dimension to the COP26 meeting. Over to you, sir, for your thoughts and reflections.
Great, Dominic. Well, thank you very much for chairing this event. Of course, huge thanks to the World Economic Forum and the Netherlands for organizing this panel. And some really brilliant contribution there from my fellow panelists, incredibly insightful. I think everyone acknowledges universally that this year, 2021, is absolutely going to be a critical year for climate. And I've said this before, and I will never tire repeating this, that I want to see the golden thread of climate action woven through every international event on the road to Glasgow. At the Climate Ambition Summit, which we co-hosted, the UK co-hosted with the UN and France last December, we had 75 world leaders coming forward making very concrete commitments. At that point, I set out 4 key priorities for COP26. So the first was to secure this step change in emissions reductions, which we all want to see. Secondly, to strengthen adaptation. And this is about ultimately protecting people and nature. Thirdly, to get finance flowing to climate. And clearly that is both public finance, but also private finance. And fourth, to enhance the international cooperation that we have around the globe on this particular area. And that has to be amongst policymakers. It was great to hear my friend Minister Koizumi setting out what the Japanese government is doing, and I want to thank him for the very good collaboration that he and I have had over the past year, which will obviously continue this year as well. Obviously, investors need to be part of that, businesses, civil society. We had some great examples, concrete examples there from Rebecca about what the business that she represents is doing in fighting climate change. But I want to just focus on the last 3 priorities, if I may, in this particular session, and how they work together, how they meld together. Look, the reality is we all know that climate change, the effects of that, the very severe effects of that are very much with us. We heard from Petri, who set out where we are in terms of global warming at this stage. So it is absolutely vital that we go further and faster on adaptation. And we need to build this resilience into our societies and our economies. It needs to be completely woven into that. And ultimately, of course, that will require all of us to act. So whether we are representing governments or businesses or investors or indeed cities or indeed civil society, we all have a role to play. And the human case, Feike talked about this, the economic case for this is absolutely overwhelming. And we know, as we've heard, that the most vulnerable are at the greatest risk from climate change. And in fact, those who have done the least to cause it. Time and again, you've heard it from my fellow panelists. We've seen the devastation, the human misery that's racked by storms, by droughts, by rising sea levels. And we know that without sufficient actions, millions will lose lives and livelihoods, and very many more people will be pushed, very sadly, into poverty. And we've heard from the Global Center for Adaptation, from Feike's organization, that every dollar that is spent on adaptation will yield between 2 and 10 times that in avoided costs and damages. The economic case for this is very clear. So what I'm doing is calling on leaders in all sectors to up their ambition and indeed action on adaptation. I'm urging all countries to come forward with ambitious adaptation plans and communications. The UK, of course, did that at the Climate Ambition Summit in December. And I'm encouraging all governments to align their recovery packages with the Paris Agreement and, of course, with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals as well. I'm asking businesses and cities and society and more to join that Race to Resilience campaign, which we launched yesterday, and it's about increasing ambition and resilience across the whole of society. Just to give some examples from a UK perspective, in terms of the practical solutions that we are supporting in Finding for Adaptation. So, of course, we had the launch of the Adaptation Research Alliance last week. We are very, very pleased to be supporting Life AR, which, as colleagues will know, is a program led by the LDCs, by the least developed countries, to aid their adaptation, because we are committed to adaptation being locally led. I think that's really very important, and to making progress faster through international cooperation. You'll have heard yesterday Prime Minister Boris Johnson launching the Adaptation Action Coalition. He's done that together with our partners Egypt and Bangladesh and Malawi, St. Lucia, the UN, and of course our friends in the Netherlands as well. And critically, we are also working with donors and development banks and private investors to get adaptation resilience finance flowing faster and stronger, particularly to developing countries. So we've got organizations like the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, for example, and through that we are encouraging investors to take climate risk into account in every decision that they make. Last year, we launched an initiative to accelerate investment in adaptation resilience through the development finance institutions, and I would certainly urge all DFIs to join that particular initiative. And I'm also urging donors to significantly increase international climate finance commitments and ensure a balance between adaptation and mitigation. You've heard that from my fellow panelists. I very much back that call. And so what we need to ensure is that not only do donor countries honor that totemic $100 billion pledge a year of money going to climate finance, but adaptation should no longer be regarded as a poor cousin to mitigation when it comes to finance flows. I think that's absolutely vitally important. And it's a point that Feike made in terms of what we've been hearing at this conference. So I do believe that if we can get finance moving, if we work together, if we can have the ambition and the support to act, we can increase the scale and the pace of our adaptation. And by doing that, we will protect our people, we will protect our natural environment, and of course, our economies as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Right Honourable Alok Sharma, COP26 President. We'll be hearing more from you a little bit during the Davos Agenda Week as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are delighted to be co-hosting this session in the Davos Agenda with the Climate Adaptation Summit as the closing session of the Climate Adaptation Summit. And technology permitting, I'm hoping that we can connect over to Sasha de Boer, who joins us from the studio in The Hague.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you, panelists. I am indeed your co-host, Sasha de Boer, joining from the Summit studio in the Netherlands. And this was the official closing session of the Climate Adaptation Summit 2021. The summit seeks to accelerate adaptation action all around the world by inspiring change showcasing best practices and tangible adaptation solutions. As you know, COVID-19 has transformed the landscape of our society and poses both threats and opportunities for the climate adaptation agenda. Climate adaptation is at risk of serious setbacks in the coming years due to shifts in public spending, due to the immediate relief and the potential fallout of a global recession. Yet adaptation has never been more important. Climate shocks are happening now, intersecting with and worsening impacts of COVID-19. Therefore, building resilience to climate impacts will be critical to response and recovery efforts. The Climate Adaptation Summit sought to accelerate climate adaptation, and it's vital that we keep the momentum going beyond this summit. During the summit, partners from all around the world presented their adaptation efforts and their commitments towards the future. Their efforts, our joint efforts, will be captured in the Adaptation Action agenda and shared with the summit participants, all of them. The Adaptation Action agenda will provide insight into efforts from around the world, strengthen cooperation, and facilitate progress monitoring. You and I will probably get back to work tomorrow, but within our communities, our cities, our countries, and our regions, and we will continue our adaptation action. And we will meet again at COP26 and other international events to showcase progress and share lessons learned. Thank you for participating in this co-host session from Davos Dialogues and the Climate Adaptation Summit. At the summit, we'll continue at Channel 1 with the final cast talk on the way ahead with Frans Timmermans, Patricia Espinosa, Marta Delgado and Tracy Fung. Please join us for the final word by our Prime Minister, Mark Rutte.
Ladies and gentlemen, first, let me thank you all for your contribution to the Climate Adaptation Summit. We're completely online, all in different locations, but with one common goal: to adapt as well as we can to the reality of the changing climate and to turn our ambitions into adaptation action. And this action is essential, because climate change can be seen and felt all over the world. And also because, as COVID-19 has shown, in order to deal with risks, it's crucial that we show resilience and that we do so together. And we have the opportunity to act now, but we are running out of time. Last year alone, governments around the world invested more than $10 trillion in crisis relief. This accumulated debt may reduce the ability of governments to address urgent needs. And yet, so far, most stimulus packages have not adequately built climate resilience into their recovery plans. This needs to change, because investing in climate adaptation brings many advantages in a broad range of areas. It creates jobs, protects communities and ecosystems, and promotes sustainability in a changing world. So investing in adaptation is simply the smart thing to do. And with that in mind, it's great to see the enormous spectrum of plans, ideas and initiatives that have been presented in the last 24 hours. Like the inspirational example of early movers, Ghana and Bangladesh, who are making their infrastructure climate resilient. And a fantastic initiative aimed at offering 1 million young people from the Global South a free adaptation course and so involving them actively in climate adaptation. We have bundled all these initiatives into the Adaptation Action Agenda 2030, which will help guide us towards a climate resilient future by 2030. The current pandemic poses extra challenges, but it also gives us a chance to build forward better. To build forward to a world that's more resilient, sustainable and inclusive. Let's seize that chance, together with each other and together for each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sacha de Boer from the Climate Adaptation Summit, and good luck with the final discussions there, and from Prime Minister Rutte. Back with the panel, I'm delighted to say, and probably no surprise to you as panelists or to you as viewers, we've had millions of questions that have come in about this topic. I'm going to, if I may, just offer a few up, and to the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, here's a sort of science question. It's from a chap called Rupert Howes, who many of us might know. Thank you, Rupert, for your question. Has humanity just left it too late given the positive feedback loops to keep warming below 1.5 degrees? Realistically, what can we do? What can be achieved if we do everything now? Is it too late, Secretary General?
I think that this IPCC report that was published 2 years ago was demonstrating that for the welfare of mankind and our planet, it would be very important to aim at reaching these 1.5 degrees. And these good news that we have heard from European Union, from China, Japan, South Korea, South Africa, and more recently from USA, they're positive news, and we should aim at getting also other countries on board. So there's still theoretically possible to reach 1.5, and there's a good chance to reach the limits of Paris Agreement, 1.5 to 2 degrees.
That's what I understand. It's one of those moments where we could just do this, given the level of commitments that are coming in and inching us down towards the Paris Agreement and maybe beyond 1.2 towards 1.5, which makes the COP summit so exciting in a way at the end of November. This could be one which we can just do with the leadership that is being displayed from the public and private sectors. Rebecca, and maybe to an extent, Feike, given your sectors, here's a question about the food sector. How can the food sector be engaged in a more resilient direction, e.g. food security and vulnerable livelihoods, but also food industries in the global north? We've heard a lot about the food sector. You gave us a few examples, Rebecca, but maybe what are you seeing in the food industry more generally? Is there a movement towards net zero, more resilient food systems? And maybe Feike, some thoughts from you as well, because you work in the innovation side of this agenda as well. But Rebecca first.
Thanks, Dominic. Well, of course, there's the UN Food Systems Summit that is coming up this year, which looks to tackle the issues around how does the food industry ensure that they have the right steps in place to protect against climate change. I talked a little bit about the work that we're doing on regenerative aquaculture practice, so working with smallholders, working with farmers around the world to think about how can you grow and cultivate crops in a more positive way. Some small tangible examples of things that we've been working on. One, I think, is a big shift in dietary habits. We made an acquisition last year, the vegetarian butcher, and we're seeing a huge move now towards plant-based, which of course better in terms of thinking about deforestation, but also in terms of eating more healthily. Last year we made a big announcement with the WWF through Knorr around Future 50 food. So actually, how can we encourage greater dietary diversity, so stopping consumers around the world, all of us, eating the same foods all the time and having an over-reliance on those key crops. So actually by including greater diversity of fruits and vegetables in the diet, thinking about different sorts of grains, move to plant-based that I talked about before, I think we can make some important moves towards changing the reliance on those same key areas. And then I think lastly, I talked a little bit, Dominic, in my words earlier about the importance of thinking about water management in the most effective way. So how can we think about drip irrigation? How can we think about better water management when we're growing our crops and commodities?
Thank you, Rebecca. Feike, what are your thoughts on this sort of resilience, if you like, in the food system, and particularly in the food industry in the north, shall we say?
Well, it counts for all food production, maybe the South first. I mean, climate change is impacting more Africa and certain Asian countries at this moment than it does the North. And that's, of course, bad because the South did not cause it. And that food production needs to be resilient by local production, by helping to have different seeds which can survive droughts or survive floodings, different agricultural methods. In Kenya, now they work with apps that help the farmers how to fertilize and how to deal on the weather, etc. So there are all kinds of technologies on growing the crops and that make it more resilient in an adverse climate situation. Droughts, flooding, seeds, fertilizers, all that stuff. And a project like Africa Improved Foods is very much supporting this with the African Development Bank, local production. But also for companies like Unilever, our company, or other companies who are dependent on all kinds of food supply chains, you better prepare and realize whether their supply chains are resilient, and otherwise at once you will be confronted with some hiccups or some issues. By the way, I also think that companies should be more transparent about that towards their shareholders, towards the media, towards the outside world. What is the risks they see? And maybe also embrace the TCFD framework for this. The good thing is also, next to all the problems, Dominic, that there's a lot of technologies or a lot of solutions also. So I would like to end also on a positive note on this. We are smart enough to develop solutions as well. And that is in adaptation very important, not only to prevent, but to find solutions for the problems. And they are. They need to be financed, like Minister Sharma said, but they need to be developed. The private sector can play a role, but they are available.
Thank you. And then the final word for this closing session of the Global Adaptation Summit to you, Alok Sharma, as COP26 President. You'll be pleased to know, sir, that the questions and comments that we're getting in, there's so much support for a breakthrough. Like, we want this to happen. What can we do? How do we get involved? Lots and lots of comments like that. So we're all rooting for you, it seems, around the community who've been watching this session. But in particular, there's a couple of questions which are really about how can that ambition, both on resilience and on tackling the greenhouse gas emissions, how can it be unlocked? How can we help? What is your ask to those companies and those financial institutions and communities generally to get involved? It's so important, and there's such a groundswell of wanting to help. And people we're interested to know what your kind of remarks to them would be, how to get involved, what can people do?
Great, Dominic, thank you very much for that. And look, I'm absolutely delighted that so many people are willing us forward to have a year where we're going to actually make a real difference when it comes to tackling climate change. And as I said in my remarks as part of the panel, is that this is on all of us. At the end of the day, if we are successful this year, that success will belong to each and every one of us in playing a part. I mean, you raised the issue about businesses and investors. I mean, clearly their role is absolutely vital in that. I mean, you've heard from Rebecca, from FICA, in terms of what businesses are practically doing already. So, I mean, it is, you know, the work that's going on in developing resilient agriculture. You've heard about the work on crops that's happening, and actually infrastructure as well is absolutely vital, making sure that we have resilient infrastructure as well around the world, and then providing those technical services and assistance, particularly in developing countries, which is going to be so vital. I mean, if you look at what businesses can do right now, we made reference to that during the panel session, but the UN climate champions for climate action, Nigel Topping for the UK and Gonzalo Munoz for COP25, have been doing a brilliant piece of work, and I want to pay tribute to them for the work they've done through the Race to Zero campaign. We've got a significant number of companies that have signed up to that, committing to net zero by 2050 on science-based targets. And of course, those companies also working, bigger companies working with their supply chain and supporting them to sign up and to aim for reducing their emissions as well. And the other big initiative, which was launched yesterday, was this Race to Resilience campaign. And this is about pulling together non-state actors, businesses, of course, as part of this, to improve the resilience to climate risks. And we're talking about supporting 4 billion people in vulnerable groups and communities by 2030 around the world as part of this initiative. I talked briefly about the work that we are doing through COP26 on climate resilience, so the CCRI work that's going on, which, you know, is a private sector investment. But again, it's showing the private sector coming forward. We've got 62 institutions representing over $10 trillion who are developing and testing practical solutions when it comes to transparent risk pricing as well. So, you know, there is a huge amount that is going on in terms of the private sector. And I think this is a question of us supporting each other, policymakers, supporting the business community, the wider civil service community. And I do think if we continue to do that this year, then I hope we will be able to achieve something that we, all of us, are very proud of by the end of 2021.
Thank you so much, Alok Sharma, President of the COP26. We're all here with you to make this work. So thank you for those kind words. Rebecca Marmot, Chief Sustainability Officer of Unilever, Shinjiro Koizumi, the Environment Minister of Japan, Feike Sijbesma, Honorary Chairman of Royal DSM, Chairman of the Global Commission on Adaptation, Professor Petteri Talas, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, our friends and colleagues with the Government of the Netherlands, who have been hosting the Global Adaptation Summit, and of course our colleague and friend Sacha de Boer, who has been moderating and chairing that. This has been a wonderful discussion co-hosted between us and the Netherlands as the closing session on the Global Adaptation Summit. So here from the Davos Agenda in Geneva, on behalf of the fantastic panel and our colleagues in the Netherlands, we close the session. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.